may be worried that there are certain money habits that are making you poor, and maybe you are making some financial mistakes that are really holding you back. Hello, my name's Rachel and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll be going through some of the money habits that might be making you poor, and you may not have heard of some of these habits or mistakes. So let's get stuck in. So the first one is saving or investing before paying off high interest debt. Now this one was inspired by a person that came to me and said, I'm saving and prioritizing saving over paying off my debt. And I simply said that doesn't make any financial sense to do that. Now let's get stuck into the reasons why. So by August 2023, the average interest rate for a credit card was at an all-time high of 23.57%. And when you compare that to the interest rates that you are getting on your savings, which are around 4%, 4.01%, you can see that interest rates for credit card debts are much, much higher than they are for savings interest rates. If a debt interest rate is higher than you are seeing for savings interest rates, you should always be paying off the debt first. So let's look at a real life example for this so that you can really get an idea of how this might be impacting your finances. So let's say you had £1,200 worth of debt and you are planning to pay that off at a rate of £100 a month, or potentially you just want to save £100 a month for a year, and over that time you will have obviously saved £1,200, so you're putting the same amount of money in. Now let's see the financial implications of these two different options. So a debt of £1,200 at an interest rate of 23.57% would actually cost you a whopping £161.85. Now let's compare that to if you had saved that money instead. So £100 a month for 12 months. If you had saved that, your balance would then be £1,226.37. So you would have made £26.37. So as I said, the cost of the £1,200 debt is £161.85. And that is versus making only £26.37 had you saved the £100 a month instead of using that £100 a month to pay off your high interest debt. So the only cases where I would say prioritizing saving and investing makes more sense is if you have a low interest debt. So say for example, if you have your mortgage and it's not particularly high, obviously you can be saving instead if that interest rate for saving is higher than paying off mortgage. But what I'm really concentrating on and talking about here is high interest debt. So that's consumer debt, credit card debt, car loans potentially. So those kind of high interest debts, if they're higher than the rates that you're seeing in a savings account, it makes more sense to pay off debt. Okay, so the next mistake that you might be making financially is believing that you need to have a very, very high income to do well financially, when actually high income doesn't always have a huge impact. Just making sure that you have consistency with your finances and that you're very controlled with your finances, your budgeting, your saving, your investing can make a much bigger difference over time than having a high salary. So I wanted to tell you the story of Ronald Reed. So Ronald Reed worked as a humble janitor, or we would use the term caretaker here in the UK. He was from rural Vermont. When he died in 2014, aged 92, he made international headlines. In his will, he left a whopping $2 million to his stepchildren and more than $6 million to his local hospital and library. Despite earning a relatively low salary, Reed saved what he could and invested it into blue chip stocks, and with patience, his investments compounded over time so that he was worth more than $8 million. And as I said, his job was as a janitor. He also worked in a car garage as well, so had a couple of different jobs, but did very, very well financially by taking advantage of compound interest and investing small amounts over time. And that moves me quickly onto the next financial mistake that might be making you poor, and that is not understanding the power of compound interest. Now, Einstein observed that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. So compounding is a process where interest is credited not only to the original principal sum, so not only to the original amount that you saved or invested, but also to the previously earned interest. The interest that you are making on not only the capital, but also the interest that you've previously made will really see your savings maximized. I'll pop a link down below to the compound interest calculator that I like to use to really see the impact of that interest on interest. The next money mistake that you might be making is not having a plan. You might have heard the phrase before, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that is certainly the case when it comes to finance. So what I would say is really important to do is have a think about where you want to be in 5 or 10 years time and work backwards from that. So you might have a figure in mind that you want to have saved, for example, for a special holiday or for a deposit for a house. And if you work backwards and figure out where you need to be financially, you can start to work on a budget and really look at the details of how you are going to get yourself there. Because we can't rely on things in life like winning the lottery or an inheritance, for example, but we can rely on being able to take control of our own personal finances and getting somewhere that we have planned to get to. And I know that budgets can be very, very boring. I know that for a fact. Spreadsheets and budgets are not the most exciting thing to be doing, but I think if you have a long-term plan and you have an idea of where you want to be in, say, 5 or 10 years, those things can be the exciting things. So having those bigger goals that you really want to meet will give you the energy to put into having a budget and focusing on those small scale changes that over time will make massive impact to your financial position. So we're looking really at the minute details here to be able to have that long-term gain. So if you say, for example, look at changing where you shop for your groceries. So if we compare the cost of 62 different items from different shops, we'll see that there is a massive difference in the cost of those items. So those 62 same items from Aldi would cost £110.58, and the same 62 items from Waitrose would cost £140.89, which is a whopping difference of £30.31. If you save this money instead on a weekly basis, that would be £1,576 a year, or over 5 years, £7,880, and that's simply changing where you are shopping. And that figure doesn't even take into consideration if you were to choose to save that money into a high interest savings account, which would see that interest on interest, that compounding interest there, or if you had potentially decided to invest that money instead, which historically has seen higher returns than you would in a high interest savings account. So you could potentially look to invest that money, which is very exciting. So we've moved from just simply doing something quite boring like changing where you're shopping to be able to invest that money or to save it into a high interest savings account and make the most of compound interest. Talking about investing helps me to move on to my next money mistake that you could be making, and that is being too afraid to invest. So on this channel, I predominantly talk about investing. I've been investing now for a number of years, and it's made a huge difference to my family's finances and our feeling of financial security. Now, more than likely, if you have a pension, it is probably being invested for you, but I want to specifically talk to you about investing for yourself. So starting to invest might seem very, very scary, but there really are only 2 simple steps to help you with starting to invest. And the first one is opening up a tax efficient investment account. So here in the UK, that kind of investment account would be a stocks and shares ISA, where you can invest up to £20,000 a year and you will not pay any tax on your investments. Or in the US, an example of this would be a Roth IRA. So once you've opened up that account, you might be thinking, this is actually very scary. I have no idea what to invest in and I don't want to be losing my money. So if you are an absolute beginner or actually an expert alike, what a lot of people tend to do is invest in index funds or ETFs. So an ETF stands for exchange traded fund, and what you are doing there is you are buying just one investment, so one single ETF, like an all-world ETF, and by investing in that all-world ETF, you are getting access to thousands and thousands of different stocks within that one single investment, and they will be spread across the whole world. So you're getting a really diverse portfolio portfolio if you make one ETF investment. So to give you an idea of top 10 holdings, so some of the bigger holdings that you would be seeing if you invested in, say, for example, a FTSE All-World ETF, you're going to be seeing big names like Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Meta Platforms, which is obviously Facebook, and then also companies like Alphabet, and that is simply Google. So by investing in an ETF, you can then be invested in small slices of these kinds of companies. Now, I do have lots of separate videos on ETFs. I recently did one on all-world ETFs if you want to check that out in a bit more detail. But basically, the reason that often people invest in ETFs or index funds is that they are very low cost. They're passively managed, so they're not being actively managed by fund managers, which keeps the fees nice and low. And over time, they have been seen to do better than actively managed funds on the whole. So to give you an idea very quickly of the kind of returns that you would see if you invested in a FTSE All-World ETF, so I'm talking about Vanguard's VWRL ETF, over the last 5 years, so 5-year annualized returns. So every year on average, this ETF has brought in 10.20%. Now, obviously, when you invest, your capital is at risk, and that's not a steady 10.20%. That is going up and down. So there will be some years where it might much less than that. It could even lose you money, but then some years it will do very well. So there are peaks and troughs in the performance. But if you average that out over the last 5 years, every year on average, it's made 10.2%. So that's a very simple way of starting to invest, and hopefully it'll make you feel less afraid to invest because you're not having to make big decisions about which different stocks and shares to buy, and you're not having to pay high fees for actively managed funds. And then our final money mistake that you might be making is comparing yourself to others. Now, with social media particularly at the moment, it is so very difficult to not compare yourself to others and to think, I want what they have. And the fact of the matter is that there will always be someone who is doing better than you, and there will always be someone who is richer than you. So if you can stop comparing yourself to others, I think that's very, very important. And what's really helped me with this is to get an idea of what is enough. So from the book, The Psychology of Money, I thought there was a really good quote, which is, enough is realizing that the opposite, an insatiable appetite for more, will push you to the point of regret. This is a fantastic book that I've read, and it's really changed the way that I think about money. So if you can set a goalpost of what is enough for you, then if you reach that goalpost, that is enough. And you don't need to keep striving for more and more and more. So for example, if you're looking for a new house, you might be thinking, I'd like to have enough bedrooms for each of my children to have their own bedrooms, and that would be enough. What you'll potentially not need is space for a 12-seater dining room table that Mr. Jones down the road has, and he only uses it at Christmas time potentially, or maybe not even then. So really thinking about what you actually need. So yes, instead of comparing yourselves to others financially, get a really good idea of what is enough for you. That'll still give you something to aim for, but it's not just constantly trying to keep up with the Joneses and spending money that you don't need to spend on the latest model of car or the latest watch or tech, because potentially you have enough as it is. Thanks so much for watching, and have a really lovely day. Bye bye.